Okay, so similar to the polarity, we want to talk about comb filtering. So comb filtering would be both sources are two different sources. Now we'll talk about the overheads on the drum kit. Okay, we have two microphones over top of the kit, picking up kind of the whole picture of the whole drum set. Comb filtering would be we hit the snare and it arrives to this overhead at one time and then to that overhead at the other time. So now they're both are positive, but they're out of time from one another. Instead of being locked up together and going positive, negative, they're a little bit out of time because their distance is actually different from the snare drum to this overhead and snare drum to that overhead. So what does that do and how do we correct that?
Yeah, so let me start with, again, definitions. We like definitions, right? Comb filtering is produced when certain similar or really identical frequencies are amplified or attenuated by the superposition of the delayed version of the original audio source. So again, like what
attenuated would mean turned down.
Turned down, yep. Or amplified, turned up. And the response consists of a series of spaced notches. And so if you were to look at it in SMART, you'd see a series of notches, and that's why we call it comb filtering. It looks like a comb visually.
It would end up looking like like a bunch of waves like this that look like if you laid a comb down on its side, it would be a bunch of comb teeth. So that's why it's called comb filtering. Mm-hmm. That's how it would look.
And in audio, we perceive this sonically displeasing, to say the least. But it's just complete cancellation after cancellation after cancellation.
You guys know how an airplane jet sounds? That kind of thing? That's comb filtering. Like if you hear it like on a larger scale through a PA, if you hear that kind of swirly, that's comb filtering.
Yeah, and if you were to walk like front to back in here, particularly with array processing disabled, but if you were to walk front to back as you transition from speaker to speaker in a system, you're going to hear comb filtering. There's not really getting rid of it everywhere. So that sonically, I'm trying to cover sonically what you would hear because that's more applicable to the definition or the theory of it. But in simplest terms, if you were to walk the front fills, you're going to hear it transitions, which when we get into the system side of things, that's why we're concerned with aligning things at the transition point where
right,
there's
so as speakers are reproducing sound in the areas where they overlap, okay, where our coverage overlaps, that's where those waves begin to interact with one another from two different speakers, okay, and then that's where they start to cancel out or do the comb filtering. So ideally, I mean, this has not a lot to do with, this is more in design. We want to cover every area we can with as little overlap as possible because that creates that. Okay, that's why we don't want speakers way out on the sides and pointed in and covering because all this area here where they overlap is all going to create coverage. So we want our speaker systems to be as straight on as possible and covering as much of the room and not crossing across one another because that creates the comb filtering. Make sense? Great. I'm seeing some light bulbs go off here. I like it.
and you'll probably get into this too, but you'll hear the term seam as well. Seam or transition are the same thing. It's where in the simplest audio system, one speaker covering a room, you don't have to worry about timing anything. There's nothing to do with it.
What a dream.
Yeah, one speaker. The second you add two speakers, you've complicated things. You've introduced comb filtering because it's now the same source, or assumably the same source. It could be two manufacturers, which would differ sonically. But you've introduced two sources. Again, just like if you have two microphones, it's all the same. So you take two speakers. It's no different than adding two microphones to one source. One source, two speakers, or two microphones, one source. Same exact theory.
Yeah.